Now, just when you thought the Acolyte was long since dead and buried, there are still some efforts to try and resurrect it, despite the fact that shortly after it wrapped up on Disney Plus last year, an announcement was made by them, by Disney, that the show would not be getting a second season, despite very much ending in a way that implied there was going to be one, or that there was more story left to tell with these characters. However, with the show going well over budget, it cost around $230 million to make, and the fact that viewership was poor at the time it was the least watched live action show on Disney Plus, or Star Wars show on Disney Plus, though since then it seems Skeleton Crew did even worse in that department, though Skeleton Crew also cost about $100 million less. But those two things combined, big budget and low viewership, along with many out there simply not enjoying the show, doomed it, and again Disney came out and said, we're not doing any more of this. But like I said, that hasn't stopped some out there from trying to save it. There was a petition created shortly after that announced cancellation that, as of today, has a little over 83,000 signatures, which is, well, certainly not going to be enough to make Disney change their mind about it. Not when you consider a subscription to Disney Plus is about $15 a month, and you multiply that by 83,000, and you don't come anywhere near that $230 million budget. But anyway, there's also been this recent article from Collider that claims that demand for the Acolyte is sky high despite its cancellation, which is certainly a headline that caught my attention, and trying to be fair here, I was curious to see if there is indeed some truth to this, or if when we dig a little deeper, if this was an article that simply wanted to, I don't know, take some obscure data and frame it in a way that made it sound like the Acolyte was doing great here after the fact, when it really isn't. And so what they seem to be basing this claim on is that, according to Parrot Analytics, the show, The Acolyte, gets 20.4 times, or as of right now, is getting 20.4 times the viewership of an average show on a streaming service. The article then goes on to say that this is a rare statistic only pulled off by shows that become very popular, and thus concludes that viewers simply can't get enough of The Acolyte, without going into any further statistics or backing up why this statistic is so important. And so, of course, I wanted to dig a little deeper to see if that claim kind of held up or not. And the first thing I wanted to do was to sort of get a baseline for Star Wars shows in general in this department. How are all the other Star Wars shows doing when it comes to demand against the average? And the first one I looked up was arguably the most popular one out there, that being The Mandalorian. And despite it being 2 years since the last season of it came out, it still gets 26.9 times higher than the average. It also falls into the outstanding category in this department. Next, then, I checked it against a show that was, well, maybe not regarded as the best Star Wars show on Disney Plus, and that has been, or had been released even longer ago, a little over 3 years ago in fact, that being The Book of Boba Fett. And I was a little surprised to see that it was at 11.7 times the average, and also fell into the same outstanding performance category that The Acolyte and The Mandalorian had. And that's when I really started to think about what an average show on a streaming platform even is, or how many people actually watch just an average show. I mean, when you stop and think about it, there are tons and tons of shows on streaming services. The number has just added up, and more come out every single day. And this statistic, I'm assuming, is measuring all of them, every single one that has ever come out on a streaming service. Literally any and every show you can watch on streaming right now is probably being measured and factored into this statistic. And a lot of them, let's be real, they don't do very well at all. There are far, far more shows that do very poorly and are watched by virtually no one than that do very well. And thus the average here is probably pretty bad when you stop and think about how much the bad shows bring down said average. I then went on to check all the other Star Wars shows, and it broke down this way. Kenobi is at 11.4 times higher than the average, Ahsoka is at 13.9 times the average, Skeleton Crew is at 21.7 times or higher than the average, which is better than the Acolyte is doing, and Andor is at 23 times, which also is better than the Acolyte, though in all fairness that new season coming up in a month is no doubt bumping that number up quite a bit. Either way, all the Star Wars shows do indeed beat the average, and beat it by at least 11 times, and fall into that outstanding category that they are some of the best shows out there, or most watched shows even after the fact. which I think we can kind of interpret to mean that, well, it's Star Wars, right? Even, like I said, Book of Boba Fett, which wasn't the best Star Wars show on Disney Plus and came out over 3 years ago, is well above the average. So I don't know that The Acolyte coming out last year, less than a year ago, still doing well means really much of anything more than people are checking out a Star Wars show because it is a Star Wars show. That of course it does better than the average show does on any given streaming platform and being any given show. Now, to be as fair as I can be, and as I always do, I encourage you to make what you will of these numbers or to dig even deeper than I did and come to your own conclusions. But to be fair, yes, it's still among the top Star Wars shows, and when we look at the top shows, something like, well, the first one that came to my mind was Squid Game, which had a new season come out a few months ago, that's at a 76.5, so it's not like it's among the top shows. But yes, it still is above average, and again, is among the other Star Wars shows as well. And speaking of that, I was a little sad to see that Andor wasn't doing maybe a bit better as we approach the new season. But again, I don't know that we can honestly look at these numbers for the Acolyte at 20.4 times and really say that the demand for the Acolyte is anything truly exceptional and that Disney should be reconsidering the cancellation of it. And as we read further into the article, we begin to see that maybe, yes, they do seem to be intentionally trying to frame this a certain way in order to make the Acolyte look good for whatever reason they feel like doing that. Maybe it is simply because they enjoyed the show, which is absolutely fine. More power to them if they enjoyed the show and personally want a second season. And maybe they signed the petition too. But it also seems like they were upset by the, as they call it, extensive hate campaign that was, again as they say, based on the diversity of the show's cast. Which, as I've argued before, I don't think the hate for the show had anything to do with any of that, really. We've had other Star Wars shows that were just as, if not more so, diverse than The Acolyte was. Andor, for example, has a very diverse cast, and I've never seen anyone say anything against it for reasons like that. Instead, The Acolyte saw some rally against it, yes, even before it came out, because of some of the things said by the cast and crew and director Leslie Headland, that from their point of view, it seemed more about an agenda than making just a good Star Wars show. In fact, I'd argue most of the hate for the show before it came out, because after it came out, a lot of it was just criticism that the show just wasn't very good. But before it came out, people didn't like the hiring of Leslie Headland to be the showrunner because of her association with Harvey Weinstein. That was a big reason why it was rejected by many, again, before it even came out, and long before it even came out. Either way, as we go on here with the article, we see that they simply make the statement that The Acolyte proved to be a streaming success when it was released last summer, yet give no sort of metric to back that statement up. I mean, are you saying it was a success because you personally enjoyed it? Or are you saying it was a success because it had above average ratings? Again, keeping in mind that being an above average streaming show doesn't actually mean a whole lot when you consider how many there are and how many completely fail. Especially when you take into account this is a franchise like Star Wars that already has a built-in audience. And maybe they mean it was successful because, and I see people bringing this one up a lot, maybe they say it was a success because it was the second highest watched show to come out last year on Disney Plus, behind only Percy Jackson, while failing to mention what other shows came out last year on Disney Plus, because it wasn't the stiffest competition ever last year, with Agatha all along taking third place and Echo in fourth. It's kind of like bragging that you finished second place in a race, while failing to mention there were only 2 people in the race. And honestly, stuff like this is just the most annoying thing I see nowadays. This need to always skew things or frame things based on your personal feelings for them, to make things either look good or bad depending on your own point of view in an effort to manipulate people, instead of just looking at and or presenting the facts and the truth of the matter. And I'm certainly not saying I'm completely innocent here. Everyone is biased to some degree. No one is completely impartial, but come on, The Acolyte is not a success by any metric. It did not get the viewership to justify that crazy budget, and flat out, a lot of people did not like it, and it had nothing to do with hating the diversity. It was simply a bad show, and nothing is going to bring it back, and that is a reality those who enjoyed it just have to accept. Well, that's all I got for you this time. Now it is your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think about this one. Are you tired of everything always having to have a skew or a bias, and people trying to make things look a certain way depending on how they feel about them, instead of seeking any type of actual truth? Whatever the case may be, though, leave your comments below. Let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.